Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us here at the We the People Ride for Common Good Immigration and Border Practices, a cross-country storytelling effort brought to you by Vote Common Good and Greater Things Foundation. We are at the midway point. I got to tell you, it's a little exciting for some of us who are riding the whole distance. This is a 67-day venture, and we are at day 33. So somewhere midday tomorrow marks the halfway point of days. We won't reach our halfway mile point until late this week. I think we'll end up in McAllen, maybe Brownsville, when we're at the mileage point of the halfway mark of the 3,223 expected miles. We've put in some miles in the last couple of weeks, I'll tell you that, and they have been West Texas miles. And if you know anything about West Texas, especially way over here on the border, man alive, it is windy and it is hilly. And I'm going to try not to spend too long complaining about the road surface that's called chip seal. But it is not made for biking. It's not a biker's paradise out here. Every once in a while we hit tar where it's smooth and flat, and boy, you pick up some speed. But moving along through this chip tar business, it's an aggregate that's glued or I don't know, tarred to the ground, so it's very bumpy, and it's bad for cars, it's bad for walking, it's bad for bikes. Later in life, I think I'm going to start an effort to stop chip seal. But anyway, for now, we're just going to ride our bikes over the top of that stuff at our 9 and 10 and 12 miles an hour into the wind. Today, we had a very interesting ride with road construction, all kinds of stuff. An unusual day. We have today was a grind and gruel. And so the next couple of days look much different and much better. Hey, a little bit of update on what we experienced in Del Rio as well. And feel free to raise your hand if you have a question about any of this or anything else, and we'll jump to it. Britton is watching on social media and will be sending us questions if people have them on social media. So if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter or those places, and you have a comment or question for us, put it in there and we'll be glad to respond to it. So in the last couple of days, we were up in Del Rio, Texas, a place that's become very familiar on the immigration front to a lot of people because it was the space at the end of September where the Haitian community tried to cross in mass. Maybe you remember it was first 4,000 and then they think up to 10,000 people that had gathered under the international bridge. Well, we spent time there in Del Rio trying to understand what was going on, not only with that action, but what's been going on overall with border crossings. And it's very complicated. I'll try to break down some of this because I think it'll help us to all understand what's happening in our immigration system. And it's complicated in a way that it really doesn't need to be. Look, everything that a country does is going to be complex. You're always going to have complexities for immigration. We need to have a complex system for immigration, right? It can't just be simple. But it doesn't need to be complicated. And the difference between something being complex and something being complicated is basically if you can understand it or not. So my own personal distinction between something being complex is you can understand it, but it takes a lot, and something being complicated, which is there's other factors at play that are not understandable. So that's we have a complicated system when it comes to immigration. And here's a couple of illustrations of it. In Del Rio, they are allowing asylum seekers to enter the country if those asylum seekers cross the river illegally. So hold all of that in your brain for a minute. If an asylum seeker from Cuba, from Venezuela, from Haiti goes to the established port of entry, if they go to the bridge and they walk up to the port of entry where we were 2 days ago, and they present themselves to the Customs and Border Patrol agent there at the border crossing where they're supposed to, they will be turned back to Mexico. If they walk 45 feet down to the river and cross the river illegally where you're not supposed to cross and pop up on the other side of the river in the United States and turn themselves over to Border Patrol and Customs, then they'll be allowed in the country. Because there were so many people doing this, that's why the Haitians met under the bridge. So all the conversation that we have heard nonstop from people who like our border policies the way they are, they'll always say, look, of course we should have immigration, but people just need to do it the right way. The problem is partly because of a thing called Title 42, which closed our borders to anyone crossing the Mexican border who's not a U.S. citizen because of COVID concerns. It was a health statute called Title 42. They've closed it off to everyone. So what's happening now is that if people cross the border in the way they're not supposed to, then Border Patrol and Customs allows them to stay in the country and processes them through. Now, that's not the same everywhere in the country. When we were in Arizona and California, New Mexico, that's not what they're doing. So not only are people encouraged to cross the river in Del Rio, but they're also rewarded for that in a way that they're not in other states. So we were working with a group called the Valverde Humanitarian Border Initiative. Valverde is the name of the county that Del Rio is in. And some people there put together a humanitarian border coalition. And we're going to show you a video of the current executive director and of one of the founders, two different videos tonight, so you can meet them and hear what's going on with that. They are the only group that is processing these asylum seekers, many of them from Venezuela and Cuba and African nations and Haiti, processing those people after Border Patrol finishes with them and before they get onto a bus to be taken to an airport to go to their asylum host family. So that's what we have going on the border. It's very it's confusing, frankly. It's confusing to people who live in Del Rio. It's confusing to some of the people who work with the Valverde Humanitarian Border Initiative, a very small nonprofit group. It's confusing to Border Patrol. It's confusing to everyone. This is what we need to get our hands around. There's a lot of reasons that our border practices are more complicated than they need to be, but we need to get this stuff figured out. It is absolutely clear. The Valverde Humanitarian Border Coalition has processed more than 16,000 asylum seekers in 2021. There's other ports where they've processed almost none. So the disparities and the differences are all over the place. Now, I'll show you a couple of pictures here of the people that we were chatting with when we were there, and the people that we were seeing. So hang on a minute, I need to find my screen share button. This is a photo of, that's Tim Gilman, who's sitting in the front of this RV right now, and Mario Andrioni over to the left. He's one of the riders with us. And these are asylum seekers that are getting off of the bus and walking up to be processed in a room where they're going to find out what happens next. So it's very orderly. It's very well managed. It's really quite incredible. What they've managed to pull off as a very small nonprofit. And then those very people end up in a room that looks like this. And the person you see in the ponytail up in the front, that's Tiffany Burrow. You're going to see a video from her in a moment. She's the one who directs this program, and she gives instructions to these groups. The people in this room were from Venezuela and from Cuba. And you might wonder, well, why are people from Venezuela and from Cuba able to receive asylum, be asylum grantees in the United States? I think it's because we have a particular relationship with Cuba and Venezuela that serves the United States purpose in trying to disempower those governments. If those very same people had been from Guatemala, from Honduras, from El Salvador, no matter how they came across the border, they would have been sent back. So not only do we encourage people to cross the river as the international border, but only people from certain countries are going to be allowed in if they cross the river. Now, why do we not allow people from Guatemala and El Salvador and Honduras and Mexico to be asylees in the United States? Well, that's a policy question that needs to be answered. So when someone says, well, people can't receive asylum in the United States, it's true, depending on what country you're from, and if you follow the rules and walk up to the border, the border crossing. If you're from other countries and you cross the river or climb over the wall, then you're allowed to stay in. So it's just a mess. And it's been a mess for a very long time. And the good people at the Valverde Humanitarian Border Initiative, they're the ones who are trying to make it possible to manage all of this complexity and all of this mess. So I'm going to show you a video here. By the way, this is that little baby was born just a few weeks ago in Mexico. This woman is from from Cuba. She was making her way to the United States border, and she delivered that little baby. In a lot of ways, I have thought these places that we're sitting in this little room, with a box of face masks and a little, cinder block walled building. It's like a modern day Ellis Island. That little baby's going to track back and tell the stories to his children, grandchildren, maybe great-grandchildren about the time that he crossed into the United States in Del Rio. And so it's kind of amazing to think that, people have a chance to cross in all of these ways. So I'm going to show you a video here from Tiffany Burrow. Tiffany's the executive director of the Valverde Humanitarian Effort. She's going to tell a little bit about how this got started. Its origin story is somehow, to my mind, simultaneously inspiring and great, and also not at all the way the federal government should be handling itself. So it is at least complex, maybe very complicated. So here we go. Give me a minute. I'm gonna pull up that video.
Yes, we're at Valverde Border Humanitarian Coalition. And for short, we say VVBHC.
It's still long.
Yeah, well, it is.
For short. And that's the name of this county.
Valverde is the name of the county, correct.
And so this organization is new and started...
Relatively. We've been around for almost 3 years, spring of 2019.
What's its origin? How did it get going?
Sure. So in spring of 19, our county experienced a surge, and at that time Border Patrol was at capacity and didn't know really where to leave those people, so they were dropping at was essentially a gas station. It's called Stripes, and that's where the Greyhound would pick up once in the morning and once in the afternoon. But the volume of the migrants was far exceeding the capacity of the buses, and they didn't understand how to get a ticket, and so it was creating a problem within the community.
Yeah.
At that time, Border Patrol then reached out to all the pastors in our area and asked if there was anyone who would, had any ideas or anything, and out of that, one pastor in particular said, I think we can do this better. And his name was Pastor Sean Young, and he is with City Church. And from that sort of humble beginnings, he was able to bring in some other pastors, and together that was the start.
So there's a piece of this story that I think a lot of people in the rest of the United States don't really recognize. And that is that Border Patrol has all kinds of power, they have all kinds of equipment, they have many personnel, but once they have a migrant that's come into the country and can stay in the country, there's almost no system together for helping that person transfer to another city or get around. That's not just accidentally put on nonprofit organizations and on religious groups. You're saying, at least in 2019, by intention, they called the pastors and said,
they reached out.
Can all of you solve for some of that?
Right.
That's unusual, I think, and I don't think people recognize that the government the federal government will have such power up to a point and then just put it onto nonprofits. Do you have any thoughts about that piece, like that it was necessary for Pastor Sean and then for you now as the director of this project to have to pick up that part of the work?
I think it goes back to the fact that we are faith-based, and helping others is a big part of what we do. And so when you're coming from that vantage point, it's really not that political.
Yeah.
It's
Okay, so
just what needs to
that's
be
Tiffany.
done.
I spent a lot of time in the last couple of days with Tiffany. She is fantastic. Maybe you could tell what was going on though, that I was pushing on not the question of should churches help. Oh my gosh, of course churches should help. More churches should help more people more of the time, right? That'd be very good. If churches existed to benefit people who are not their own adherents, the world would be so much better. That's a beautiful thing. But maybe you heard the story. Border Patrol said, we don't know how to process the asylum seekers that we have. We're not going to spend our money on helping these people figure it out. It's almost as if Border Patrol, and we're going to ask Border Patrol very specifically this question when we can reach somebody, who runs Border Patrol, that they feel like their responsibility is done once a person is identified as an asylum grantee. So they will hold them in detention. They will follow them on horses and on trucks and with drones and with US Army, military, and equipment. They will spend billions of dollars on a wall. Once they have, and they'll spend all of this time and energy. And then once they have someone and that person is identified as someone who can stay in the country, then they're hands off. Then they called the pastors of this town and said, and we heard more of the story later from some others, and said, hey, in other cities around the country, the faith communities have stepped up to help these people find their way out of the city. Finding a bus ticket, knowing where to go, having a shower, getting a backpack with some basic equipment in it. These people have had to cross a desert. These people had to cross a river. These people had little babies in their arms trying to get to a place of safety. The US government said, yes, you are welcome here, but you're not our problem, and put them on the hands of these folks. Now, look, of course, people are going to sometimes cheat the government. Sometimes people are going to take advantage of the government. People are going to cheat on their taxes. Ordinary people, maybe even, former elected officials do that kind of stuff. We all expect that people will take advantage of the government and we should try to stop them. But when the government takes advantage of nonprofit groups and says, could you solve this asylee problem for us? That doesn't sit well with me. I don't know how it sits well with all of you, but I got a little bee in my bonnet about all of this, about how much energy will go in to vetting if the person is allowed to be in this country, and then no care for them the moment they're identified as someone that we welcome into this country as an asylum seeker. Now you put that on nonprofits. And this little nonprofit, the Valverde Humanitarian Border Initiative, or Border Coalition, doing amazing work, has processed 16,000 people this year. They're fundraising on their own. They give every family a backpack that has in it some basic items to get washed up and cleaned up, and toothpaste, and to sort of present yourself, because now they're going to be traveling for days to get to other cities where their asylum supporting families are going to be. You know how they get those backpacks? They don't get them with a stipend from the federal government. They have an Amazon wish list, and people from around the country have to send backpacks via Amazon for these people. So we've ridden by multiple detention centers, spending hundreds of millions of dollars over the last decades to detain people. And as soon as they're identified as an asylum seeker, they're kicked out on the street. What Border Patrol was doing was literally driving them to the Greyhound bus station in Del Rio, which might sound fancy, but it's actually the Stripes gas station. So they would drive them to the Stripes gas station and drop them off and say, Greyhound bus pulls up here. Now you've got asylum seekers in 2019 saying to themselves, how do I buy a bus ticket? Well, as it turns out, you can't buy a bus ticket there at the Stripes gas station. You have to go online and buy a bus ticket. So on Sunday morning, 2 days ago, we went over there and watched the Valverde Humanitarian Border Initiative have bus tickets and go online and get these people bus tickets so they could find their way to San Antonio and then get on airplanes and fly to Maine and fly to Houston and go to Minneapolis and go to all the places that they were going to go so that they could meet up with their asylum supporting families. Border Patrol, nothing to do with it. I'm going to show you one more little video here. And this is during our interview. Tiffany got a phone call and she said, hey, they're here right now. They're dropping them off. We got to walk out. So this is a video taken about 5 minutes after the one you just saw, where Tiffany now gets up and walks out, and you'll see what happens here.
Good morning.
Am I turning this thing?
Yes, you are.
Yes. Working for you. We brought a whole bunch in the morning.
Okay, let me help you make some sense out of what you have just seen there. That was Tiffany walking out of the building and a Border Patrol agent coming up with a manifest. The manifest has the names of all of the asylees on it and where they're going to go and where they said they're going to go and that they're approved to be in the United States. They drive them over in that big white bus. They drive them up there, drop them off, hand her the sheet, say, there you go. And maybe you heard Tiffany say, oh, this is all? I thought we had a bigger group coming today. He goes, well, that's all we have in this batch. So that was the small group of people that came. She normally would get 3 times that many people. Day after day after day, Border Patrol drives up, brings it over, and drops them off there. 2 Border Patrol agents paid by the federal government to drive them there, a bus that's being paid for, all of that's covered. But as soon as they're now off Border Patrol's hands, now it lands on the nonprofit to go raise money and to fund a way to be helpful to these people. We can do this better. We have to be able to do this better. Part of the reason we end up with chaos in the system is because the Border Patrol and Customs and Border Patrol doesn't have a sophisticated enough system to process all these people. And this isn't true in just in Del Rio. The same thing is happening here in Laredo. The same thing in a town called Eagle Pass. The same thing in McAllen. We're going to be this weekend with people who are doing this kind of work in McAllen. This is happening all along the border. So I thought it was helpful to show that, look, there's people of faith doing really great things. And there's no reason that small nonprofits should have to be raising money to finish out the work that our government should be doing. And I really appreciate so much when Tiffany says, look, as people of faith, we just, if people are in need, we want to help them. That's also the role of our government. Our government is supposed to help people in need. And when we've welcomed people in the country as asylum seekers, they're now the responsibility, just like any other citizen, that our government can help them. So we're going to make a big push to ask Border Patrol and the federal government to start to fund all the organizations that do this really important link between when Border Patrol is done with them and when they're in their location where they're supposed to be. And we want to make sure that that's known. So I would love to answer any questions, comments, anything that anybody has. If you want to ask anything about that or make any comments about any of it.
So I just posted, hi guys. I just posted on the chat, but I was trying to figure out how are they assigned asylum families to connect within other states, and do they get that before they leave their country, or is that what the processing is in the nonprofit centers?
Oh, that's a great question, Brian. Yeah, I should have been more clear about that. We really asked Tiffany a lot about this too, because it's so intriguing about how this goes. One of the conditions, as I understand it, one of the conditions that needs to be in place for a person to receive an asylum grant, to be granted asylum, is that they have a family in the United States that will take them in. Sometimes they're working through refugee organizations. Sometimes it's an individual. All of that is processed by Border Patrol and by Customs. and Border Patrol. So that's part of the information that they need to all write down on a form and be talked to and be interviewed before they're allowed to, before they're granted access to the United States as an asylum seeker. And there's these military-like terms, these government-like terms that they have. They have two of them. One's called an order to appear, an OTA, and an order to report, OTR. Part of what Border and Customs and Border Patrol did when there was a big surge of people was they moved all these people from an order to appear, which meant that they had to keep track of them because they were going to have to appear before a judge or a magistrate, a few weeks after they were in the United States. They switched that to an order to report, meaning they can go online and just fill out a form saying, I'm in the place where I said I was going to go, because there's just too many people. We have built out an entire militarized system to keep people from coming in this country. Brian, Carol, some of you guys will see it when we get to McAllen this weekend. And we've been watching it for 1,500 miles. Drones, tanks, horses, helicopters, trucks, walls, sophisticated equipment, all this to keep them out. The infrastructure, once someone's welcomed in as a migrant or as asylum seeker, it doesn't exist at all, or almost non-existent. So the disparity is crazy. So they are interviewed, then they're welcomed in. What that sheet of paper said right there was their name and the place and the phone number of the family that they're supposed to go to. What Tiffany found out, though, doing this work is sometimes that information on the sheet is no longer accurate. That the person says, yeah, my brother can't take me, or my brother passed away and I didn't tell them, or they didn't ask, or whatever. Like, I don't have anywhere to go. So Tiffany, on a regular basis, she said multiple times a week, is having to get on the phone and find a new family somewhere in the country that will take in this asylum family. And to take them in is a big burden. It felt like adopting a child. The family can't work for 6 months by order of the government. It's one of the rules. Can't work for 6 months. So the people have to be funded and have to be cared for, have to have a place to live, have to get to doctor's appointments, have to get to other appointments. And often, if you're an asylum seeking family, that's how you get in. There's multiple people. So one of the things that this group is doing is trying to recruit churches around the country who can come around a family and support them. And sometimes this is coming up last minute. Like in Del Rio, they can't stay overnight. All of this has to happen same day. Those people that you saw, they arrived there about 11 o'clock, maybe 1 o'clock. They were going to be on a bus by 4 o'clock, and they were going to be in San Antonio by 8 o'clock that night. They are processed out of Del Rio. And then they're sitting in an airport in San Antonio trying to get on an airplane, maybe having enough money. Like, it is just bizarre. And look, I have a very pointed political opinion about this. I think some Republicans like that the system is chaotic because then they can point to all the chaos and say, we just have to shut down the border. There's a much better way to handle this than the sort of chaos that's going on. So here, someone like Tiffany has to learn all this stuff and then be a troubleshooter for 16,000 people in the last 10 months. Just think about how many people that is every single day. And Border Patrol just drives up in a bus and drops them off. Yeah, and then Abe asked a great question. And then you consider all the trauma that these asylum seekers are experiencing. Like, what if they left their country as an asylum seeker? There was some problem there. They didn't just leave because life wasn't good. There was some significant threat. Then they had to make their way across the Mexican country and sometimes the Mexican desert. And then they end up here in a place and they don't know what's going on, and they're just full of all kinds of trauma and pressure and all of it. So it's just, there is so much that needs to be. And look, there's a place for nonprofits for sure. And our government can give stipends to groups to do this work. The government does this all the time. A partnership between the for-profit, the nonprofit, and the government is great. We unloaded a truck of items that were donated by Walmart when we were in Del Rio. Trying to find my photos of that. I had one here. I would show it to you if I could. But we a big truck was an entire truckload of items was donated to this group to be able to distribute to the asylum seekers, and it was full of all kinds of personal items and care things and all sorts of stuff that came from Walmart. This entire truck was full of things. We spent hours unloading and unpacking this. So places like Walmart want to give to the asylum seekers and to migrants. So they donate all this stuff, and then it gets put on this group, and then we have to, we're fortunate enough to be there that day and could help by unloading all that stuff. They're just dealing with this every single day. The people that feel like they're not carrying their weight on this front is the federal government that has the resources to really make a difference in all of this. So we want them to fill that donut hole of lack of care. All right, so that's my big my big rant about all that. Any other comments or questions about what we saw in that part of Del Rio? And then I want to show you a video of Sean, who's the pastor, who said yes. And there's this really interesting conversation we have about the river versus the wall. And I thought it was be something worth showing to you, because in Texas, most of Texas doesn't have a wall. The Rio Grande River is the international boundary, so it winds its way, and that's the boundary. And the real difference between a life-giving river as the international boundary and a stagnant, brutal wall with razor wire on it says something really different. And I think we should for sure have boundaries for our countries and our states, but we can have it be a life force that runs through those boundaries and not a death wall that runs through the boundaries. But any other comments or questions anybody has about any of this?
Are we not, or so we're dealing strictly with asylum seekers who made it into the country? Or are we, what about all those that don't get access? What happens to them?
Okay, so if you're an asylum seeker who doesn't make it in the country, or you're a migrant who's denied entrance at a border, or you cross the river, or you climb the wall, or you came through the desert and you're apprehended by Border Patrol and you're sent back to Mexico, the same thing is happening in Mexico. So we've spent time in the migrant care facilities in Mexico, where these same people, say you're from Guatemala or you're from Honduras, and you've made your way all the way up to the border, Border Patrol apprehends you, then they drive you to a city in Mexico and drop you off. That's it. And then either the cartel interacts with you, turns you into a criminal or something in their world, or a nonprofit organization in Mexico and in the US, often working together, finds you and then has you and tries to support you to be able to get back in the country, or feed you or keep you alive. So we were there in Mexico at a place where we had a cross planting for a young man who was 24 years old and died when he got returned by Border Patrol, and he was so exhausted and so dehydrated that he died. And so there was a cross planting for him. Other times we sat with people who said, I tried to cross, Border Patrol apprehended me, brought me back. Fortunately, these good people cared for me, and now I'm either going to go home or I'm going to try to come into the country again. Or we were with asylum seekers from Guatemala who said, we were just turned back. They didn't even tell us why, or they didn't even take our names. They just turned us back. And sat with 3 moms from Guatemala who all have young children and no husbands in their lives at all, who tried to come because their lives were threatened in Guatemala, and they're just sitting in this shelter in Nogales, Mexico. And you know who's funding all that? Small nonprofits trying to raise money to care for these migrants. So again, what the U.S. government could do is to provide some level of care for these people. So what you saw on the US side is kind of one level of tragedy, because it's like they're doing great work and these people actually get in the country and the government should help. When they're not allowed in the country, it's really dire and really quite sad, and something that that'll break your heart when you see it. And we will see it. Brian, I know you're going to be there, and Carol, you're going to be there too. We're going to go into Reynosa, Mexico, which is across the border from McAllen, Texas, next Saturday, and we'll see people who are living in a public park, have been returned to Mexico as asylum seekers or as migrants, and don't have anywhere else to go. When you've left your family and you've left your hometown because your life is threatened, you're not going back. It would be a death march to go back to the place that you left. So how do you make a new life? And these people are trying to figure out how to do that. And there's a bunch of individuals and nonprofit groups that are having to bear the burden of all this. We talked to somebody who said a tragic situation doesn't have to be a tragedy. And her point was, her name is Dora. She works on the border. She was actually from El Salvador, and she came in 1983, I believe. She was one of the first groups found in the desert. The country came all together to say we shouldn't let 16 of the people she traveled with died in the desert. Friends of hers died with her. She's a survivor of that. And our country rallied around and supported them. She's now a citizen. She now works on the border. She runs migrant centers on both sides of the border. She's an incredible person. If you go into our video streams on YouTube and on Facebook, you can see interviews with her. She's incredible. 16 people died the year she came, which I think was 1983. The country reacted to that. In June, 387 people died in the desert that are bodies that were found. Nobody even knows about it or cares. We've just turned a blind eye to the tragedy that's happening in those places. So we really need to do better on all of these fronts. It's just incredibly heartbreaking. These people. All right, I'll show you one more video. This is of Sean Young. Sean is a pastor. He's a missions pastor at a small startup church in Del Rio called City Church, doing really great work. He's the pastor that responded to Border Patrol and put all this stuff together. We have a long interview with him. This is just one little short part that I thought was interesting in his comments about the border wall versus the border river. So this is a conversation with Sean.
You've mentioned a couple times earlier today when we were working on loading that truck and all that stuff, and I heard you say it here as well. You refer to crossing the river. And you even sometimes pause if you're going to say the border and you change it to the river. You all refer to the Rio Grande, so going into Mexico, not crossing the border, but crossing the river. Am I right to have picked up something in there that you think about it more as crossing a river than crossing the border?
I never thought about that, but it's possible. I don't know. God has created us all equal in His own image, and whether it's across that river or on this side of the border, again, it's I've never put a boundary on it. I guess I've always kind of felt at home there compared to here, and I have friends on both sides of the river, and
I mean, I think it's an interesting way that you have this sense of your shared human experience with people on both sides of the river.
Yes, definitely.
Even if our country wants to call it on two sides of a border.
Yeah.
And you're narrating a different story.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely have, lots of relationships on that side, and they're just as much, part of me as my neighbor over here. They are our neighbors. They're right next to us. In many cases, many of them work over here. In many of the cases, their children go to school over here. It's just a geographical line that's there, but they're no different.
I've been telling people on the ride, I said, hey, because we've been from California where there's a wall, and Arizona where there's a wall, and New Mexico and parts of Texas. And I said, but when we get to certain places, it's the river.
Yes.
And there's something different about, we've stood on both sides of that wall, shared communion through the wall, and the wall really screams, and it says something very particular. It's why a lot of people support it and why a lot of people don't. the river is more natural and it's more humane, and you're looking at people right across the riverbanks with this like life force, because the Rio Grande is the life force of this area, right?
Yes.
So the life force is running through the two people groups. That feels really different. When you go to have you crossed the border or been to other places in the country where it's more, where the border's marked by the wall?
Yeah, we even have sections of it here in
Yeah.
Del Rio. There's there's sections where it went to like kind of old wall, semi medium sized fence to wow, here's this big new structure that's been put in and not finished, but it's there. You know, little sections of it.
How does the wall versus the river feel to you?
Well, definitely not natural. I mean, but in some cases, you know, I alluded kind of to the border patrolman that is out there kind of risking his life, and I can understand there's, you know, there's some strategy behind some of the things that they're talking about, and it can be overwhelming for that person to work with these big groups of apprehensions all at once, and um, it's just an obstacle to kind of maneuver people more to where they can be met with better attention, but also trying to guard against the ones that are meaning to do bad.
Just nonsense.
Or
It's a real different vibe, though, isn't it? The river versus the wall. Yeah.
yes. Especially in our area. I mean, we have. There's actually water here. In a lot of different areas, there's not.
Yeah, that's right. Is there much water in the river right now?
Yeah.
We're gonna hopefully get down there tonight. If we
Yeah.
manage this all right.
So I think maybe you could feel some of what Sean is experiencing. He works closely with Border Patrol, needs to, understands the complexities of all of this. There's there's something so life-giving. I walked across the Rio Grande a couple days ago, the same pathway that the Haitians took when they came to that international bridge. There's men standing out fishing, and they just kind of there's a concrete waterfall that's there, and it's about shin deep, and you just walk across and then come back. And if you go up on the bank, there's a militarized vehicle sitting there, but you can just kind of walk back and forth across it. And there's this recognition, that the Rio Grande, this is the Rio Grande Valley. It's fed by the Rio Grande River. It's the water of this area. And, in the 1800s, the US and Mexico decided to make that the international border. And the real question is, how do we want to treat our borders? Do we want to treat them like a militarized protection zone? Or do we want to treat them like the life force that gives life to both sides of the river? And so I think it's a real metaphor for us. Current governor of Texas really wants to build a wall on the Rio Grande. He just has advocated for it very, very strongly. The former president of the United States really wants to build a wall on the Rio Grande River. And I really hope we never do. All right, any comments, questions about any of that? Anybody wants to say anything? Hey, all right. So, Carol, Brian, it's your time. Would you mind sharing a little bit about why you're going to be joining us this week? You're coming in Thursday and Friday, and going to spend some time in McAllen and Reynosa, and we'd love other people to join us too. So, Carol, would you mind going first?
Sure. I'm very curious, and I want to kind of go see for myself. I want to be supportive for this effort. And I want to be a witness, and be able to tell people kind of firsthand what I've seen. Just a lot of things that you've been saying here are just so maddening, as well as heartbreaking, but maddening. This kind of reaction that I feel, because we're so irresponsible. Our government is so irresponsible in this situation. And I'll have people argue with me about whether, churches should be taking care of people. The government shouldn't have to do, these things for people, not just immigration, but other stuff, social services, which is just such a joke when you think about it, because there's just not enough. There's not enough in those areas to be able to take care of what we need to take care of. And case in point here, the money that we spend just keeping people out and militarizing, and all the people that receive money doing that, and yet we can't give money to help people if we're going to bring them in to actually have a life. And just the fact they can't work for 6 months and they can't be able to have services. And I'm like, that's just crazy. If they're here, we welcome them. And we need to find a way, an orderly way to get them in. I do think, along with you, that there is a concerted effort to make it look chaotic. I do believe that, because that gets people riled up and they're like, oh my God, look what's happening. So anyway, I'm excited to come down, but I want to just be there, be supportive, witness, and be able to speak to people about it. So.
Well, really excited to have you. You're going to be a biker. I know you're getting in on Friday, and we'll still have some biking miles left, I think, on Friday when you arrive. So maybe we can get you on a bike on Friday. And then just so people know, if they want to join us too, look, it's not Friday yet. Come down on Friday. And then on Saturday, we'll be doing a press conference in McAllen with some of the partners that work there, a group called Love Mercy, and Alma Ruth will be leading that up. And then we're going to do a community bike ride across the border into Reynosa, Mexico, where the Remain in Mexico migrants and asylum seekers are living in a public park there. And we'll have a chance to experience that and then learn more about the work that Love Mercy and other groups are doing in McAllen. And then on Sunday, make a bike ride down toward Brownsville and into Brownsville, which is another area with some significant history of crossing. And so a lot of experience. If anyone's interested in coming and joining us, go to the wethepeopleride.org site and click on there and say, I'm interested in coming. We'll find room for you. And maybe like Carol and Brian who are coming, you're like, well, I can't fly my bicycle. Don't worry about that. We've got a bike for you. We've been hauling a trailer full of bikes around that people have been riding for the last 33 days. So we will have a bike for all of you as well. All right, Brian, hey, would you mind giving us a little update on yourself and what it is
Sure.
that is important for you about this?
Hello, everybody. I am in Southern California in Orange County. I pastor a church out here. I think for us, we've been kind of getting ready for this for the last decade or so to be more present in this nation. And what I mean by that is I serve a predominantly Asian American context, and our church now is full of second and third generation. And I think the Asian Christian Americans have not had much skin in the game. And part of it is because we have been migrants, we have been immigrants, and we have been longing to be stable and survive the last one or two generations, at least in terms of Korean Americans. That really there was a huge influx of Koreans in the 70s and 80s. But I feel like now our generation really needs to claim this nation as our own, feel responsible for it, take ownership in terms of providing neighborly love. So I really take it as a spiritual formation issue for our church. We've been working hard at loving the outcast, especially the disabled community in our area, and also the families that are unstable with single moms or abused moms. So we've been trying our best to love our neighbors here, but recently we've reached over the border, and now we're beginning to build homes in Mexico. with Youth with a Mission, and especially with the issue with Afghanistan and Haiti and what's happening in the border. I've been just telling my staff, I really feel as I'm getting older that this is part of my job, is to be present and listen, and so that I can bring back the stories and hopefully a pathway to be more involved, for our community. And our people are ready. Our people are praying. They are so ready to be a part of God's light in this nation. And so I just feel honored to be able to even go. But I do request an electric bike, please, because I am so out of shape. I've been praying for an electric bike, that there will be one with my name on it, because my wife is so worried that when I come back, I'll be out of commission. And she's like, don't you dare go over there and then come back and think you're going to rest. So,
around.
Yeah. But it's a big honor for us to even be there.
Well, we're really excited to have you. Abe Monowitz rode on one of the bikes that you're going to ride on. Abe, do you have a word for Brian about the bike riding part of this?
I would just say it's amazing, and allows you still have to work. You don't get off easy on these electric bikes, but they allow you to keep up and to go up those hills with people like Doug and the others that are really seasoned. So I'm glad that you're going, and I think that you're gonna have a good experience, and a really eye-opening experience to anybody that does this. For me, that's what it was. Can I say a couple more things, Doug?
Please.
So I went out, excuse me, and got there and spent about a week with the ride. I got home. What day did I leave? I left on Monday, and got home, and it took a couple of days to recover, not physically, but mentally, because it's something else when you are just riding along and you see U.S. soldiers on duty in the United States, and most people have no idea this is happening. There were so many things that we saw, and experiences going across the border and riding back and forth and all that. The ride itself is connected. It's the people that you meet and the things that we do that bring the riders together with the communities that we're visiting, like the videos we've been watching. So I really do encourage anybody to just figure out a way to get on this and be a part of it. I'm hoping to get back towards the end. But I also want to share where I'm at right now. I don't know how much of this you can see. It's one of my favorite spots in Washington, D.C., just because it's so beautiful and also so awful. And that this is the monument to the Japanese internment camps during World War II. And which, of course, those are migrants. Those are people that moved here. Many of them were citizens. But the other thing about this, I don't know if you can see this or if it's straight or not, but it's a quote that's carved into this. And can you see it? It says, "Here we admit our wrong. Here we affirm our commitment as a nation to equal justice under law." Those last four words are the word carved into the U.S. Supreme Court building, equal justice under law. This is the first, as far as I know, the first monument dedicated to admitting a mistake. And one day, there will be a monument to admitting the mistake of our current border policies. And that's why I walked over here. I was at the U.S. Supreme Court. Tomorrow are arguments about whether they should reinstate the death sentence for the Boston bomber. And of course, we're here to stand up and prayerfully say, no, we need to reject the death penalty. But I didn't want to get in here and talk about that, just to say that, that's why I'm in Washington, D.C. And that's why I came to this spot to be connected with the ride tonight.
Wow. Abe, thanks. Thanks so much for being there. And I didn't know that monument existed. I've been to Washington, D.C. a bunch of times. I didn't know that was there.
It is. It is. You don't even, you have to know it's here. You can walk right by and miss it. It's right up from Union Station, where I'm looking at it. If the trees weren't there, I would see the Capitol building. And right behind me is it's like NBC News, the whole building where all those news stations are. We're 2 blocks from Union Station. So
Hey, take a picture. Take a picture and send that, would you? We'd love to put that in our
sure.
newsletter this week. Well, thank you, Abe. We'd love to have you back. Anyone else? We're pushing up to an hour. We never let these go longer than an hour. It just jinxes Zoom meetings. Thank you all for being part of this. Hey, Lauren, I see you popping on. Did you want to say something? You're on mute still. Lauren, you're still on mute.
That's right. I was watching it with Paul for a while, then came upstairs and got on my own computer. So good to see you. And I was happy to hear what everybody had to say. It looks like it's going well and you're getting a lot of information.
Yeah. Well, it was like, I don't know, 33 days ago, Lauren, I think we had dinner together in San Diego before we ridden a mile. And yeah, here we are. And just to point out, I'm sitting in the RV that we travel. We travel with a truck and a trailer and an RV. So if you're sort of looking at the decor, mid 2000s RV decor, this is how we roll here. Occasional hotels, but a lot of RV life, some camping out. So nice to see you there, Lauren. Brian, thanks so much. Paul and Shirley, Abe, everybody, and all the people that are watching on social media too. I think there's some questions. We'll respond to the questions inside the social media spaces because we're gonna wrap this up for the night. Brian, we'll see you down the road. Lauren, we'll see you real soon sometime. And all the rest of you, keep up with us on social media, and we'll check in a week.
All right, great to see you. Bye.
Thanks.